So I would really encourage people to, even if you're not sure if you want to go into academia or go into tech or, some other field, to keep in touch with folks and like have those conversations, learn what different companies and different jobs are like, just to keep your mind open and get a sense of like what's out there and what will be the best fit for, the kind of lifestyle you want and the type of problems you want to work on. I do think it's important to make sure that you're developing transferable skills like Python and being familiar with some of these machine learning concepts that you can apply to PhD research, but also apply to just like general growing your tool set, and then like leveraging that network so that you stand out above, the hundreds of other applicants that maybe have more direct industry experience.
Welcome to the Astronomers Turned Data Scientists podcast. I'm Joseph Ahern, one of the co-hosts, and I've been a data scientist for about a year and a half.
And I'm Jeff Silverman, one of the other co-hosts, and been doing data science professionally for just over 7 years now.
Great, and our guest today is Jess Kirkpatrick. Hi, Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess. I've been a data scientist for 12 years now.
It's more than both of us combined.
11 years, 12 years.
Awesome. Before you got into data science, what were some of the things that you did research with physics, astrophysics, cosmology, that sort of thing that ultimately led you to be a part of the Astronomers Turned Data Scientist community? Kind of like before you knew that data science was a thing, what were the things that you were doing?
Sure. So I had been doing coding and data analysis in undergrad for research. So I learned to code my freshman year of undergrad. And did my undergrad thesis on data analysis and simulations. And then in grad school, I worked with David Schlegel, who is a PI on the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and BOSS. And I don't even know what the new iteration of that telescope is now. But I was looking at large scale structure using quasars from BOSS and from SDSS. So my thesis involved a lot of data analysis. We were using different, what I would now call data science methods, but that wasn't the word that we were using. But analytics and machine learning methods to try to separate and classify stars from quasars in not spectral data, but just normal photometric data. And then so that we could follow up with spectral, follow up with BOSS. So I used neural nets and different analysis functions to try to separate those. So, and I deliberately chose to work in Python because it seemed like it was a more flexible language that was being used not just in academia, but in industry. I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in academia. And at the time, astronomy was very IDL, and I didn't know that many people that were using IDL outside of astronomy. So yeah, I was doing a lot of the things that I do now, but instead of applied to humans doing things on a website or an app, it was data from a telescope. So yeah.
Good.
So
yeah.
You mentioned.
I know my advisor was using IDL too, but he encouraged me to keep using Python. So it was just kind of where we were at, in the past 5-10 years. Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jess, you mentioned you've been a professional data scientist for quite a while. You're certainly one of the first people that I know of that made the transition from sort of academic astro and physics research to the tech industry and data science specifically. And you've written some blog posts on Medium. I was just pulling them up September of 2013 is one of your posts, Astronomer to Data Diva. It's an excellent post. I read it, probably 10 years ago, I think, when it came out, and people I've met over the years at ATDS and other data science groups have referenced it and have met you in person and, sometimes didn't even make that connection that they've read some of this work. So we'll put up the links to that. I think, a lot of those articles are great. So two questions here kind of buried in my rambling. One, given that this was, early days for people making this transition, early days for even the field of data science in the tech industry, how did you go about making that transition? And then the second one, which potentially will take a bit longer, is, if you could think back to that time and what you wrote about back in 2013, 2015, what are some pieces that are still accurate and what are some pieces that have of advice that maybe have changed over the past decade or so? So feel free to take it in either order, but I really want to hear the answer to both of those questions. So I asked a twofer.
Sure. So, so yeah, I really struggled finding my first job. I had a two-body problem at the time. So me and my partner were trying to find jobs in the same place. And I was not sure if I wanted to do more of an industry job or try to continue in academia. I had not loved my PhD and found it really challenging, but I also didn't know what else I could do. So I did something which I don't recommend other people do, which is I just applied to everything and anything that I thought I could possibly get. So I was applying to postdocs. I was applying to teaching colleges that didn't need postdocs to, hire faculty. I was applying to finance jobs. I was applying to consulting jobs. I was applying to data jobs. I applied to science communication jobs. So, I was all over the place and I probably sent out over 100 applications and had very few interviews. It was a very hard time in my life. I remember at one point talking to my partner after, 6 months of applying and not really hearing anything from anywhere and being like, maybe I should just be a barista at Starbucks. And he's like, well, that wouldn't be so bad. You like coffee. And I'm like, PhD, I'm going to be a barista at Starbucks. No offense if you're a barista at Starbucks. It's a very great job. But, I was hoping to do something that applied my science background. So yeah, it was it was really, really hard and confusing time. And and in the end, after all of that, I had one consulting offer for a consulting company. I had one postdoc offer and I had a faculty offer at a teaching school. And then I had my first data science offer. And which was lucky that I had that many options in so many different places. But ultimately, the data science offer paid more and was in a city where my partner also had a job. And that was sort of why I took it. I just was like, well, I'll try it. It seems like it's aligning with my personal life. And if I hate it, I'll, go back on the academic job search in a year and just see how it goes. And then within 2 weeks, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely the right thing for me. I didn't, like Jeff mentioned, I didn't know that many people who had done the transition. So there wasn't something like Insight, or there maybe were boot camps, but there weren't these kind of feeder programs for academics. And so I was really lucky that I actually just happened to know someone that I had went to undergrad with who was working at Microsoft, which is where I got my first job as a data analyst. And they didn't even call it data science when I got my first job. I was a insights manager. I was an insights manager. And then they later transitioned that title to data scientist after that became the hot term. But yeah, I knew him and he referred me and got me a foot in the door. And I think if I hadn't had that connection, I wouldn't have gotten that job because I got no other data science offers and didn't even get interviews for any data science or data tech jobs other than the one that I had the connection. So then to So the reason why I wrote all those posts was because it was so hard for me, and I struggled, and it took me so long, and I made so many mistakes that I wanted to share some of that experience and try to make it just a little bit easier for whoever came next, and also put my name out there so that if people wanted a connection and wanted someone to help them, that they had a name of someone who they could reach out to, because I didn't have that. And I just was like, well, what do I wish I had had, a year ago when I was doing this? So I tried to do that for other people. And it's been really great. I've talked to lots of people as they're deciding whether or not they want to make this transition. And, a lot of those connections have become friends and have become colleagues. And, and I've gotten to see a lot of people make this transition, and this community of astronomy to data science is kind of a manifestation of that. All right, so I think I only answered one question. What was the other question? What would I do? What is different about job searches? Or?
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the stuff that you were writing or the stuff that you experienced, what has changed over time, right? Like, there's definitely some advice, that I think is pretty bog standard, but I'm curious to know where you think things have changed over maybe mistakes that you made, or advice that you would give somebody 10 years ago versus 1 year ago or today. How might that be different?
Sure. So I do think one thing that's a lot easier is, since there's a lot more people who have done this, most people have a personal connection with somebody who is in the tech industry from their PhD program or from their school. And that I really do encourage leveraging personal connections, because that's still, I think, how most people get a first job or even get jobs after their first job, is knowing somebody or having a friend of a friend. And that can go both ways. Not only does it help you get your foot in the door, but it also helps you know, like, oh, hey, this is a cool company because my buddy is giving me the inside scoop of, like, what it's like to work there. And so I think that can really, make it be clear that it's a better fit in both directions. So while when I was in grad school, I sort of thought, like, oh, networking is like BS, or like, not worth my time, or like, fake or whatever. Why would I be on LinkedIn? Now I'm realizing that, a lot of that is super important. And it's not just for like selfish reasons, like it can be very mutually beneficial to have a community of people where you can go to for advice or input, or like, asking about how they set up things in their company. And so all along my career, it has been very helpful to have a community of people who are working on similar problems that I can get help from. And also when I'm looking for jobs, they're helpful. And when I'm looking to hire people, it's helpful to have that community, because both are hard. It's hard to find the right person to hire. It's also hard to find the right job. So I would really encourage people to, even if you're not sure if you want to go into academia or go into tech or, some other field, to keep in touch with folks and like have those conversations, learn what different companies and different jobs are like, just to keep your mind open and get a sense of like what's out there and what will be the best fit for, the kind of lifestyle you want, and the type of problems you want to work on. So that's something that I think is slightly easier. But, I think now that data science is a much more kind of popular career, and, a lot of people know what it is. There's master's programs, there's boot camps, there's a lot of people who are already data scientists. It is a little bit more competitive in terms of there's just a lot of people who are already established in this field. And so if you're applying for a more junior position as somebody with a PhD, you're going to be kind of applying next to people who maybe don't have a PhD, but they have several years of experience working in industry. And, that's a different set of skill sets. And that's just, that can be hard to compete against if there's somebody who already is fluent in, SQL or, knows a lot of the concepts around the business, the business domain that you're working in. So, yeah, I think that it can be a little bit more competitive now, or maybe there's just a lot of people who want to get into this field now. And so that's why I do think it's important to make sure that you're developing transferable skills, like Python and being familiar with some of these machine learning concepts that you can apply to PhD research, but also apply to just like general, growing your tool set. And then like leveraging that network so that you stand out above, the hundreds of other applicants that maybe have more direct industry experience.
Well, kind of on a slightly different topic, I'd like to hear more about the founding of ATDS and getting that started, and then how you participated in some of the conferences, giving talks over the years.
Yeah. So when I was still in grad school, I got involved with the AAS through the Women in Astronomy like subcommittee, and was writing blog posts for the Women in Astronomy blog, and that's where a lot of those data science transitions posts, they were cross posted there. And then after serving my service on that committee, I was elected to the board of trustees, I think it was originally the council, but now board of trustees for the AAS. And so I served on that for 3 years, and that required going to meetings, going to the AAS meetings and having a board meeting before the meeting started. And that, was great because I got to learn a lot about, well, how does AAS like as a professional organization function, and how do the journals function, and what are all the different things that they provide in terms of resources. But I also got to see a lot of the inner workings of the meetings, and was able to figure out a way to get a committee, like a splinter meeting happen. The main issue was like trying to get the splinter meeting to happen, but not requiring the people who were not astronomers to have to pay the same very expensive fees for the entire meeting. Because if you're a normal tech conference would maybe be a couple $100, and it can be a lot more for AAS. And you don't have necessarily research grants that can cover it if you're not an astronomer. So that we worked on having a new membership level for being a astronomer alumni, which then gave you a discount at the meeting and allowed it to be less expensive. And so that was sort of a prerequisite to then being able to, in my mind, get a splinter meeting that would be people would be interested in coming to and be able to convince their employers to send them to. And then Jeff and Emily McLinden, that very first meeting, helped with co-organizing. Jeff did a lot of the work. And I didn't feel like I could do it by myself, but having that crew of people to, pay for the room and get sponsors for food and advertise it and get enough people to come and get speakers. And then it was really popular, both within people who had already made the transition, but also with postdocs and grad students who were interested in learning more about what that career track was, and get exposed and network to folks who had already made the transition. And so I think when the first one was so successful, then that, the AAS saw it as okay, we should make this a little bit easier to continue to do, and has provided, I don't know exactly, because I stopped being part of the organizing committee after the first year, but I think the AAS has been a good partner and helped continue to make it happen. And yeah, I gave a few talks. I was at that point still on the board of trustees, so I was getting supported to go to all the meetings anyway, so it was quite easy to show up. And then COVID happened, and so I stopped going to meetings in person, but I've participated in some remotely, and I'll be participating in the one this year. If I don't know if it will have happened already by the time this comes out, but yep. And it's great. I mean, I think that the community, both like the astronomers to data scientists, AAS meetings, we also have like a Facebook group. For a while, we had like a group that was meeting up in person in the Bay Area. It's been a really great community for me. You know, I've gotten a lot of like job kind of connections, and not necessarily like I'm getting hired by somebody, but just like meeting people, getting referrals. I've interviewed for jobs at like Stitch Fix, where there's a lot of astronomers. And it's just nice to have a group of people that you can go to and ask for input or advice or talk about challenges, whether it's technical challenges or managerial challenges or hiring challenges or trying to figure out where you want to go next in your career. I just loved having that community of people that's outside my current job, where there can be maybe some political reasons why you wouldn't want to like talk about job hunting with your team or whatever. So it's been great. And you know, astronomers are awesome people, so it's been also fun to be able to go to the AAS and get to keep connected with my friends who have not left. So that's been great too.
Yeah, just to echo some of that history. Thanks for summarizing that. We haven't chatted about that originating story of ATDS in a while, so it's always nice to hear that every once in a while. But yeah, January 2019 was the first one at the winter meeting of the AAS, the first ATDS, and yeah, since then the like you said, Jess, the community of data scientists, of astronomers, has been very supportive, and the AAS itself. You know, I have to definitely shout them out. The Employment on Committee has been, you know, incredibly supportive and helpful, and definitely provides funding for, you know, making sure that we have the space and the AV equipment, and that we can run a splinter session every winter meeting. So definitely big thanks to them. And yeah, you know, kudos, they're putting their money where their mouth is, right? The alumni affiliate membership still exists. It's still much cheaper than, you know, a normal academic researcher membership. And then having that gets you a much discounted, like you said, registration for the meetings as well. And, you know, a positive from COVID, which feels weird to say, but, you know, hybrid meetings, like you also mentioned, Jess, are a thing. And the AAS meetings, they've had different combinations of the amount of, you know, remote versus in person and hybrid and stuff. But something that's been consistent for a couple of years now is that the splinter meetings can be run hybrid, and people can participate virtually without registration, without any cost to anyone. And so that's really allowed our ATDS splinter session to be very open for a couple of years now. So, you know, astronomers or current data scientists who maybe, you know, couldn't get funding or don't have funding for even, you know, a discounted rate for the alums, or a student rate, or people that, you know, are in other countries, right? Different time zones. They're participating, they're watching the recordings. So it's great that we have that opportunity, and continue to have that opportunity to make things very, very open and accessible. Even though, you know, being in person, you know, there are other events, there's more networking throughout the week of the AAS meetings, but yeah, it's nice that we can put a lot of that for free out there in the universe. Cool. So another question that I had for you, Jess, we've talked a bit about this over the years, but like I kind of want to hear maybe a condensed version of all your different moves, because you've been at a number of companies, a variety of companies, from, you know, pretty small startups to Microsoft to, you know, a lot in between. Some of your moves have been more your choice, and some of your moves have been less your choice. So I'd love to hear sort of, you know, some of those transitions and what the different circumstances were, and sort of how you dealt with that, because I've definitely heard people's concerns of, well, you know, what is it like working for a huge company? What is it like working for a small company? You know, when a big company lays off 10% of its workforce and I get, you know, laid off, you know, how does that affect my life? When a small company goes under, how does that affect my life? You know, that kind of stuff. And so I think you're in a you've got a lot of experience around those kinds of situations. So I'd love to hear some of your feelings from the time, and then looking back on it of like, oh, that actually wasn't too bad, or oh, that was terrible, and I'm glad I didn't realize it at the time, or vice versa.
Yeah, of course. So one thing that I will say is that while it was super hard for me to get my first data science job, about 6 months into that job, I started getting recruiters reaching out to me on LinkedIn, people that I didn't know, from not necessarily companies that I had ever applied to, encouraging me to apply for a job. And I was like, what is going on? Where were you 6 months ago? I'm not that different of a person. But it turns out that, basically me being able to like hold a job for 6 months and not get fired by Microsoft was all of a sudden this like indicator that, oh, okay, cool, she's vetted. So now we're going to reach out to her and try to recruit her. And so, I will say that that was the hardest job to get by far. And while, there's been a softer job market recently with a lot of layoffs and less hiring, it still is just much easier to find the subsequent roles, both once you have proved that you can make the transition, you have a network, you just have more applied experience. So even the interview process is like doesn't require as much studying because you've been studying by doing your job, basically. So I have moved around quite a bit. I don't know if I would recommend it necessarily. I have had a little bit of a commitment problem at times where I don't stay places as long as probably I should have. But one thing that I do really appreciate about the tech industry is it isn't that uncommon for people to move around every 2 years, for a variety of reasons. Startups will, shut down unexpectedly. There are layoffs. Sometimes you want to learn a new skill set and get exposed to the greatest and best thing. And so you'll want to move to get that exposure. And it's a hot industry that's growing often. And so you're kind of constantly getting opportunities, and a way to move up quickly, especially if you're at a company that's not in a growth mode, is to move to another company and go and in that move get kind of a promotion. So a lot of my moves were because I was recruited and headhunted and then was being offered a like much bigger role that paid more and was a better title. So that was kind of enticing me to move. So yeah, I started off at Microsoft, and then was recruited to start a data science team at a very small ed tech company. I was the 10th employee and the first data person. And I hadn't heard of the company, but I was really interested in education and kind of mixed my desire to do data and do tech, but also the academic world that I had been part of for a really long time. And I think one thing that's really cool about being at a very small company and being the only data science there is you're just kind of forced to learn a lot and do everything. Like I basically did data engineering. I did algorithms implementation. I did analytics. I did business intelligence. Like I did all these different things because there was nobody else to do it. And I won't say that I was the best person or the fastest person or did it in the most efficient way, but it just exposed me to all the different things that you can do as a data scientist, and that also helped me figure out like, okay, which of these do I like the best, and if I ever do want to focus in the future, what would my focus be? I'm really glad that I had that experience early in my career, but I'm also really glad it wasn't my first experience, because at Microsoft I got exposure to like how things work at scale, people who had been doing data engineering, data science for many years and could teach me the ropes, and also to get exposed to a bunch of tooling and like establish things that I never would have been able to like build on my own or even think of on my own. So, yeah, I with that second ed tech company I joined, we got acquired by a larger ed tech company, and part of that acquisition meant that I was part of this like larger team that was out of a company that was based in Santa Clara, which was like a 2-hour commute. And yeah, like culturally it was a big shift. I didn't really feel the same way about that company that I did about the startup that I had joined. And eventually was like terminated from that job because of like me not kind of getting along with the culture. And I was a little naive. I sort of would like call people out and stand up for things that I thought were not right. And learned that like, yeah, when you do that to executives, that they don't always like that, and that doesn't, it's not always appreciated. So that was a situation where like I was terminated for performance, and that was pretty devastating, like to kind of have that happen and have that happen. I guess that was like 4 years into my career, and thinking like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get another job? Like I just got fired. And, I share that not because I'm proud of it. It's definitely like embarrassing. And like, it was a very hard experience, but like, just to say that like, I was able to get another job. I think like legally companies aren't allowed to share why you left. And so like, it's never been like an issue for future employment. And I think one of the things about the tech industry and people moving around, and people will leave jobs to take a break before being ready for their next job. People don't really ask you, well, they might ask you, why are you looking? But they won't necessarily say like, well, what happened at your last job or whatever. And so you can without lying, just frame it as a way of like, yeah, it wasn't a good fit, where after the acquisition, I just didn't feel like that was the right role for me anymore. And, so, I took a couple months off, and then, got a job at a more like mid-sized startup. There was about 400 people, a company that focused on getting people jobs, called Hired, and worked there for a few years. I like companies of that size. My current company is also about 300 people to 300 people. Especially as a manager, because it's big enough that I can have a team and like kind of influence the larger data science function, and try to get more of the company to use data and use testing to influence like strategy. But it's not so big that there's a ton of like red tape or process to get things moving or to get a project to happen. Microsoft was just, there was so much coordination across a bunch of different teams and dependencies that everything was quite slow, and you had to kind of plan it out well in advance. And so it was harder to be creative or spontaneous. And some people like that. Some people are like good with that rigidity, and it like being able to know what they're going to be working on for the next 6 months. But I'm not as good with that. And so I think for me, being in a smaller place or mid-sized place is nice, because I have a little more flexibility. And yeah, I also was at Slack for a while. Slack was about 1,000 people when I joined. And that was closer to the Microsoft experience of it being a larger organization and a little bit slower paced. But I liked it because there was a lot more of the kind of like support and resources that were not there at the smaller companies, like a whole infra team, a whole data engineering team, a whole bunch of like internal tools. And they had a lot of people there that had come from Facebook. And so I learned a lot of like very good best practices of the way that like Facebook had set up their whole data pipeline. And there was just so much data because, you know, there were like hundreds of thousands of Slack communities, and they're spending all day, every day on Slack, like putting messages and doing actions. So it was, I had never worked at that scale where it was just like so intense, to so much intense amount of data. And you had to really think about, how do I like optimize this? And how do I like make reduction pipelines so that I can actually like make sense of all of this information? So I learned a lot there just about working at scale. And then I joined a friend startup as like the first non-founder and built out the entire technical org. So I was the head of data and engineering, and hired like 30 people, and, you know, eventually spun up a separate engineering team and sped up different data science teams. But that was super interesting, of just like figuring out more how to like build out a company and see a company go from 2 people to 30 people. There's just like a lot of changes of how you need to operate and like, you know, work together. So seeing those transitions was really interesting, and managing that change. But ultimately, like, I don't know if I'm particularly well suited to managing like organizations. I like having a team where I can kind of know what's going on with all the people below me. And when you start managing managers or managing teams of people, that, you know, it like, you feel very removed, and you don't get to do as much data science or technical things. But also it's just feels a lot more like you're just shuffling around resources, or like keeping track of like, you know, making sure people know the right information and connecting people. And it's not as interesting to me as like actual math problems. So, but I'm glad I had that experience. Like, I wouldn't have known that, but yeah, I think for me, like, you know, managing a team of individual contributors is like my favorite thing. Maybe I'll eventually manage a team of managers again, but I think it's a great combination of both being able to talk about technical problems and feel like I'm still involved, but also have more impact than if it were just me doing like hands-on keyboard stuff. So, so my current job at ThreadUp, yeah, I have a team, and my ownership is the product. We partner with the product managers, and do everything around data science for the app and the website and the customer experience. So there's another data team that does like marketing analytics, and there's another team that does operations for our warehouses, and I do the product. So I just talked for a long time. I'll pause.
No, one final footnote I want to add, or maybe really quick question that I think I know the answer to. So over those, I think 5 to 7 companies, depending exactly how you count it, and 10, you know, years on the calendar, how many cities have you lived in?
Well, I've always lived in the Bay Area. I did move from Oakland to Berkeley, but just like half a mile
Yeah.
from one side of the border to the other. But I have always lived in the same place. I loved being at Berkeley, and I stayed in Berkeley and after grad school. And some of those jobs were in San Francisco, some were in the East Bay. But yeah, I've never had to move, which has been great because I love it here.
Yeah, and that's sort of the point behind the question, right? I feel one of the, you know, one of many awesome things that I think is great, and even more so now in the last couple of years about data jobs in the tech industry, is you don't have to bounce around the country or the world like many academics end up having to do. So that is certainly a nice thing, and people can live in the Bay Area or within a few block radius in the Berkeley-Oakland border.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that there is a really high volume of data jobs in the Bay Area, but yeah, since 2020, there's actually a lot of places that are fully remote or distributed. My husband just got a job at a place that's distributed. So he's choosing to stay here, but he could also work from Japan or, New York or Hawaii or wherever. And I'm sure he will at times do that, wanting to take an extended vacation somewhere. So, and there's a lot of places like that. And Jeff is in a position like that too. So it's great.
One thing I'm wondering about, out of all the projects that you've been a part of, not necessarily as individual contributor, but also as manager, do you have like a favorite that you're allowed to talk about that maybe going in you were really excited about and the outcome lived up to your expectations?
Yeah, well, so one that was really cool. So when I was at the company that was helping people find jobs, it's very common in the tech industry to have these like kind of fun few days or week called a hackathon, where anybody can kind of come up with an idea and then just have a few days to like try to work on it, or get a team of people to work on it. And a lot of those ideas will then get turned into parts of a product or like a project. But it's a way for people who are the individual contributors to kind of demonstrate like things that are cool and get them kind of prioritized in the company. So I did a hackathon where I at the time we weren't collecting any demographics about the people that we were helping find jobs. We just had their names. And I knew that there was this like wage gap that had been discussed about women making like 73 cents on the dollar to men. And so I was curious if we could see that in our data. But because we didn't know the gender, it was a little bit hard to do it directly. So I basically did this analysis where I predicted based on people's names, like what their gender was. So, like Sam would have a like low certainty of being man or woman, but like Jessica would probably be high certainty of being a woman. And then saw like for people who had the same years of experience and were going out for the same like job title, how were the salaries differing? And we had, tens of thousands of people who had found jobs through our site over many, thousands of companies. So it was like an interesting data set because it was like bigger than, than maybe you could do for just internally analyzing a single company. And so that found that, oh yeah, like there is a gender wage disparity, that, people who have a name that is highly likely to be male, when you control for things like years experience and title, are getting higher salary offers than women. And then that turned into kind of like a whole thing, that a set of initiatives that we tried to kind of address with the product. So we started collecting optional demographic information and then giving employers tools around like, hey, this is what is the normal range for this job, to try to help, take out that bias of giving like different offers to different people, and do more like education on the platform about gender and race bias. And then we published results of how like what our data was showing in the wage gap between different identities, and did that year over year, and showed how our interventions were helping reduce the wage gap. So so that was like super cool, because it was a project that I just kind of came up with. It turned into a whole series of like work that the company did. I got to like represent the work in media interviews and like talk to like the Washington Post, the New York Times about like that work. And so yeah, it was a really, really fun set of work, and very kind of, I think, easy to understand for everybody, like even my grandma, or so yeah, that's one.
All right.
Cool.
I think we're getting to the point in the podcast where we have to, think about the future and future looking. We talked about the past. We talked about, some of the stuff that you've done, some of the advice, I think that you might give current folks, looking to make the transition and things like that. But looking ahead, say 5 years, where do you see, I think both, where do you see, data science as a field, especially as it pertains to maybe academics trying to get in the field or continuing in that field, and where do you see yourself? You mentioned a little bit, maybe manager of managers, maybe continuing with your team happily, but yeah, where do you see yourself going, and the field kind of as a whole in the next few years?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a big hot area right now in tech and in data science is these large language models like ChatGPT, OpenAI, and that is just this, now that we have kind of the capacity for computers to like take huge amounts of information and find patterns automatically, and make predictions on those patterns. It's like it's super cool, and it involves deep learning and language models, and so that's an area that I'm personally very excited about. I work at ThreadUp. It's like an online retail company for used clothing, and right now, the way that you would interact with most retail is you say, all right, I'm looking for, a black dress that is knee length and the used materials, and you can filter down and like find the thing that you want. But, I can imagine a future where you could say, hey, I'm going to a wedding next weekend in Napa, and I want something to wear. And the large language model will know, like, okay, Napa, this is the weather prediction for next weekend. Weddings, these are the type of colors that are appropriate for a wedding. Like, and you could even say, like, okay, can you show me some photos of you at other weddings, and could analyze themes and the clothing that you've worn before, and like help find something that's both like, on trend now, but would be weather appropriate, would be occasion appropriate, and would fit your body well based on images you've uploaded. Like there's a lot of like potential there to just really like use things in a completely new way, to not only help you find the things you want, but also like inspire you to try things that you maybe wouldn't have thought of. So that's where I'm really excited about, and the kind of work that my team is focusing on right now is thinking about how can we leverage these new tools to help have a better experience for our customers and help them find things that they are looking for, or that they didn't even know they were looking for, but that are going to kind of delight them and be a good match for them in terms of their clothing choices. So that's an area. I mean, I know it's very like trendy right now, and I'm not of the camp that like LLMs are going to make every jobs obsolete, or like are real intelligence. Like, I don't think it's actual cognition, but I do think that it is a way to synthesize way more information than we've been able to as like individuals, training a model. And there's a lot of like cool things you can do with those tools that were not possible, a year or two ago. So I'm excited about that.
For someone who is trying to make the transition from academia to data science, do you have any recommendations on online courses or books, or what might be the most impactful thing that they could do as they're approaching this transition?
Yeah, I mean, I did talk about this in some of my blog posts. I don't think my advice has changed a ton. I think it's important to know some technical skills, to have exposure to a modern language like Python. And if you can like use SQL or some sort of like database and know how to access data from a database, that is very useful. I did not know that before I transitioned, but I wish I had, because it's very important. I've used it at every job I've had. I think there are a lot of like cool courses to teach you about machine learning models, to teach you about how to do deep learning, or like natural language processing or interact with large language models. There's like a lot of cool things out there for free. You know, MIT has courses that are out there for free. There's Coursera. You know, I actually haven't taken many of these myself because I've learned most things like on the job. So I'm not maybe the best person to give advice about specific books or courses, but like, you know, a lot of my colleagues have done things on like Coursera and found those really useful, and a lot of them are free. I don't know if you need like the certificate to pay for the certificate, but just being, you know, getting the content and learning, going through the practice, I think is more important, and understanding the concepts. You know, I think though that it's still going to serve you better. Like if the choice was to spend, you know, 5 hours doing a Coursera course on your own, or 5 hours doing things where you're out there and you're meeting people in the field, like, or you're doing like a hackathon, or you're going to a meetup, or you're going to a talk, I think that time is better spent, because I think those personal interactions are going to be more fruitful than trying to learn something from a book, in terms of like breaking in and having that kind of getting in your foot in the door. So while it's great when I see people who have done a whole bunch of Coursera courses, I think that I don't value that as highly as having actual job experience or doing an actual project or an internship or something like that. And so I would try to prioritize having those more connections, or doing things that have a product that you can show at the end. Insight, I think one of the reasons why Insight is so successful is because you do focus on having this tangible project, and then it's really a networking opportunity where you're put in front of a whole bunch of companies and you've got your foot in the door to show what you've done. But you're not like learning. I mean, I didn't do Insight, but like, there's no way you can learn everything in 5 weeks. Like you're just, you know, it's mainly just helping demonstrate something to people to get your foot in the door. And so you don't need to do Insight to do that if you can like leverage making connections in your network, and if you can do some projects yourself that teach you some of these skills. One more thing I will say is, you know, I've had internships at most of the companies I've worked at, and will have PhD students or undergrad students or master's students as interns. I think that PhD students don't necessarily think about looking into industry internships, or maybe they feel like discouraged by their advisors to take a break from their research to do industry internships. But especially if you can find something that will teach you some skills that can be applied to your research, or, you know, work on your thesis, I think it is a very valuable thing to do if you think you want to go into industry. It also like will pay a lot better than grad school, and so it's a way to kind of like get a little bit of extra money to like get you over kind of the end of your grad school experience financially. So that's something I wish I had done, or like had been available when I was in graduate school, because I think it would have you know, helped me kind of have that experience and that in to get the job after I graduated. And most internships for the summer have applications around January, February. So that would be the time to look for the following summer for internships.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I know that when I was applying for jobs, I found this one internship that was with astronomers and machine learning scientists together. Like they would go into different teams and over the summer work on a certain project. FDL, I think it was. I don't remember what that stands for, but yeah, I ended up withdrawing from the application process because I got hired already on a full-time job. But that looked really interesting to me as I was in my job search, and it would have been only like 3 months. It was in person in, I think, in the Bay Area, but I think they're also doing one in Europe now. So for anyone looking, like, I think our audience might be interested in something like that as well. But many companies will do internships. And I know that at my company, PACCAR, we had several interns this past summer who had just graduated from their bachelor's degree. And so it just kind of showed how tough the job market is, that like the only people who got the internships were the ones who were finishing up, not the ones who were in between years. That's not ideal, I know, but it was a tough year. Thanks for coming on our podcast, Jess.
Great. Yeah. And I'm Berkeley Jess on all my social, LinkedIn, Twitter, Berkeley, like the university, and then JESS, one word. So add me, find me. I'm happy to connect to people. And my blog is also berkeleyjess.blogspot.com. So you can find a lot of stuff about data science on that blog. But yeah, this is great. I'm excited to see some of y'all at ATDS, and I'm really glad that you guys are doing this podcast and getting more of this advice and information out there. I wish it had been out there when I was looking, so I'm glad it's getting out there now.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Jess. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Astronomers Turned Data Scientists podcast. Please subscribe so you can find out when we release future episodes.